My daughter was 11 weeks old the first time someone in my family put their hands on her. It was 2:47 in the afternoon on December 25th. I know the exact time because I had just checked my phone to log her last feeding. I am a pediatric nurse case manager. Documenting times is not a habit. It is a reflex. And that reflex, that specific, unremarkable professional tick, is the reason my sister did not walk away from that Christmas without consequences. The hit was open-palmed. It was not a tap. My mother called me dramatic. My father had been deployed for 14 months. He walked through the front door 40 minutes later. Welcome back to Family Revenge Stories New, the channel where quiet people keep the receipts and family learns that boundaries are not suggestions. If you've ever been told that your reaction was the problem when someone else's behavior was the cause, this story is for you. Drop a comment and subscribe. We're just getting started. I have been a pediatric nurse case manager for 9 years. What that means practically is that I sit at the intersection of medical complexity and family crisis. I coordinate care for children with serious, often life-limiting diagnoses. I talk to terrified parents at 3 in the morning. I write incident reports. I know what a bruise looks like at 4 hours versus 24 hours. I know what accidental contact looks like versus deliberate force. I know the difference between a startle response and a reaction to pain. I tell you this not because I want credit for it. I tell you this because my professional life trained me to see things clearly, and my family spent 34 years training me to doubt what I saw. My husband, Marcus, is a high school history teacher. He is the kind of man who takes notes at parent-teacher conferences on his own children's behalf, who remembers anniversaries in the metric of what was happening historically on that date, who held my hand through 41 hours of labor and never once looked at his phone. We met in a hospital waiting room, his student my patient, and I knew within the first 20 minutes that he was the kind of person who showed up. It was the thing I had spent my whole life trying to become. Our daughter Nora arrived in October. 8 pounds 4 ounces. Perfect oxygen saturation from her first breath. She had Marcus's ears and my mother's eyes, which was something I tried not to think about too hard. My family is loud and warm and completely unable to let silence exist without filling it, usually with something that costs someone else. My mother, Diane, is the gravitational center of every room she enters. She does not tell stories, she presides over them. My sister, Kelsey, is 4 years younger than me and has, for as long as I can remember, been the one who got to want things loudly while I quietly arranged for those things to appear. My father, Colonel James Hartley, has been in the Army for 31 years. He has been deployed for large chunks of my life. When he is home, there is order. There is accountability. There is a man who believes in his bones that how you treat people when no one is watching is the only version of your character that counts. He had been in Germany for 14 months. He was supposed to arrive December 26. His flight was changed. He did not tell anyone. I did not know he was coming. Neither did Kelsey. That matters. Christmas at my mother's house runs on a schedule that Diane controls completely. Arrivals by noon. Gifts at 1. Dinner at 3. No exceptions, no input, no negotiation. I had mentioned twice in text messages that Nora was cluster feeding and our arrival would depend on her last nursing session. Both texts were read. Neither was acknowledged. We arrived at 12:47. Nora was asleep in her car seat. I carried her and still buckled, the way the NICU nurses had shown me, because at 11 weeks you do not transfer a sleeping baby unless you are prepared to deal with the consequences. Kelsey met us at the door. She had been drinking since 11. I know this because my mother mentioned it later, almost proudly. Kelsey gets into the Christmas spirit early. Kelsey looked at Nora in the car seat and said without lowering her voice, "God, you're going to carry her around in that thing all day?" I said we'd let her sleep a little longer. Kelsey said, "She's fine. Take her out. I want to hold her." I said gently that we'd wait until she woke up on her own. Kelsey looked at my mother. My mother shrugged. The shrug said, "Your sister is being difficult." The shrug said, "We both know how she is." The shrug said nothing about the 11-week-old baby whose sleep cycle they were annoyed by. The next 2 hours passed the way family holidays always pass, with the performance of warmth stretched over a framework of tension. My mother asked Marcus about his job with the specific inflection she uses when she considers a profession beneath her notice. Kelsey refilled her wine glass twice. I nursed Nora in the bedroom alone, and came back out to find that Kelsey had reorganized the gift table in a way that moved our presents to the floor. At 2:47, Nora was awake and fed, and I was holding her on my shoulder, walking slow circles near the window the way she liked. She was not fussing. She was making the small, compressed sounds of a baby who is content. Kelsey crossed the room and reached for her without asking. I turned my body, not sharply, just slightly, the way you do when you're protecting something small and warm from something that doesn't understand its own force. I said, "She's a little overstimulated right now, maybe in a few minutes." Kelsey's hand came down on the back of Nora's leg. Not a stroke. Not a pat. A smack. The sound was small, but the force was not. Nora startled, the full body startle, both arms out, the kind that happens when the nervous system registers shock, and then she screamed. Kelsey stepped back and said, "Oh, she's fine." I barely touched her. I looked at my mother. My mother looked at me. "She's fine, sweetheart. You're being dramatic." I did not say anything. I carried Nora to the bedroom, sat on the edge of the guest bed, and with one hand I soothed her and with the other I opened my phone and typed the time, what I had seen, and the exact words that had been said. I am a nurse case manager. This is what I do. The report writes itself. You don't wait until the feeling passes. You document while the observation is fresh. Nora's cry dropped to a whimper and then to silence. I checked her leg. There was no mark. There would not be a visible mark at 11 weeks. The vascular system doesn't respond the same way. But I knew what I had seen, and I had seen deliberate force applied to a sleeping infant's leg by an adult who had been told no. I sat there with my phone in my hand, looking at the Notes app entry. December 25th, 2:47 p.m. The entry was 4 sentences long. It was the clearest thing in the room. Marcus was in the living room when I came back out. He read my face. He asked quietly if we needed to leave. I told him not yet. He nodded. He didn't ask why. After 7 years, he knows what it looks like when I'm gathering information. My mother came to find me in the kitchen 20 minutes later. She put her hand on my arm and said, "Kelsey didn't mean anything by it. You know how she gets during the holidays. You always take things so personally." I looked at her. "Nora is 11 weeks old," I said. She startled and screamed. "Babies startle," my mother said. "That's what they do." I took my arm back. Not dramatically, just back. "I have it documented," I said. My mother blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means I have it documented," I said again. She went back to the living room. I made myself a cup of tea and stood at the kitchen window. The front door opened at 3:31 p.m. I heard my mother's sound first, a sharp inhale that she makes only in one specific situation, and then I heard my father's voice say, "Merry Christmas." He was in civilian clothes. He had a bag over one shoulder. He looked thinner than he had 14 months ago, and more tired, and he was looking around the room the way he always looks around a room he's just entered, taking inventory, identifying who's present, assessing the emotional atmosphere. It takes him approximately 4 seconds. It is not something he does consciously. It is something the army built into him over 3 decades. His eyes found me. Then they found Nora, who was on Marcus's chest in the carrier. He crossed the room and put one hand on the back of Marcus's shoulder, and looked at his granddaughter for a long moment without speaking. Then he looked up at me. "You all right?" My father has asked me that question my entire life. He asks it the same way every time. Quiet, level, looking directly at me. It has never once been small talk. "I need to show you something," I said. He said, "Okay." I showed him the notes entry in the kitchen. He read it once. He did not say anything immediately. He set my phone down on the counter and was quiet for a moment in the way that he is quiet when he is deciding something. Then he walked into the living room. Kelsey was on the couch with her third or fourth glass of wine. My mother was in the armchair. The television was on. My father said, "Kelsey." Kelsey looked up. The wine glass hovered. "Did you hit the baby?" The room went very still. Kelsey said, "I barely tapped her. She's totally fine. Megan is overreacting." My father looked at my mother. "You were there." My mother said, "James, it was nothing. Megan documents everything, you know how she is." "Diane." One word. My mother stopped. My father said, "Your granddaughter is 11 weeks old." He did not raise his voice. He has never needed to. Kelsey said, "Dad, come on. Megan always does this. She always makes everything into a hole." "I read the documentation," my father said. 11 weeks. Deliberate force. The child screamed. Kelsey put down her wine glass. "What documentation? It's a text in her phone, it's not." "It's a contemporaneous record," I said from the doorway. Time-stamped at the moment of the incident, written in clinical language, before I had any conversation with anyone about what happened. That is how documentation works. I do it every day. Kelsey looked at my mother. My mother looked at my father. My father looked at me. "What do you need?" What I needed, it turned out, was not a dramatic confrontation. It was not a speech. It was not an apology, though one came much later from a person who wasn't Kelsey. What I needed was for someone in that family to use the right word. My father used it. He sat across from Kelsey at the kitchen table, and he said without any softness in it, "You struck an infant who could not protect herself, and when her mother reacted, you called her dramatic. That is not a misunderstanding. That is a choice. And choices have weight." Kelsey cried. She is very good at crying. My father waited it out. Then he said, "You will not hold Nora today. You will not hold Nora until Megan decides otherwise. And if Megan decides never, that is a complete sentence." My mother said, "James, you're making this bigger than it." "Diane." Again. Just her name. "You told your daughter she was being dramatic. When someone put their hands on your grandchild, think carefully about whether you want to defend that position in this kitchen right now." My mother did not say anything. She looked down at her hands. And in that look, not guilt exactly but something adjacent to it, I saw what I had always suspected but never confirmed, that she knew every time she called me dramatic, that she was choosing Kelsey's comfort over my reality. She just never expected to have to account for it. If you've ever been the one in the room with the documented proof while everyone else performed doubt, you already know how this kitchen felt. The temperature, the quiet, the way a person looks when they've run out of reframes. Stick with me. We're not done here. Marcus and I left at 5 p.m. Nora slept the whole drive home. I sat in the back with her, one hand on her car seat, and I did not cry until we pulled into our garage and Marcus turned off the car and said simply, "She's safe." And then I cried for about 4 minutes. Specifically, I counted. I am a nurse. Crying has a function. I let it do its function and then I stopped. That night, after Nora was down, I wrote a longer account. 3 pages. I sent it to our pediatrician the next morning with a request for a welfare note, a standard clinical record that the child had been seen and assessed, with a parental account of a concerning incident. The pediatrician agreed without hesitation. The note went into Nora's file. It is still there. My sister is not a monster. She is a person who has never experienced a consequence she couldn't charm or cry her way out of, and who believed completely without question that my motherhood, like everything else I'd built, existed to serve her access and convenience. The document in Nora's file does not say that. It doesn't need to. It says what happened and when and what the child's state was at the time of assessment. It does not editorialize. Evidence rarely does. In January, my mother called. She said she had been thinking about Christmas. She said she was sorry that things had gotten so tense. She said she hoped we could move forward. I asked her one question. Were you sorry when you called me dramatic, or only after Dad arrived? She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "That's not fair, Megan." "Mom," I said. "I have it documented." I wasn't threatening her. I want to be clear about that. I was simply reminding her, and myself, that I had stopped depending on her to validate what I saw. That phase of my life had a timestamp. It ended at 2:47 p.m. on December 25th. Calm is not the same thing as weak. My family had confused the two my entire life. It is very easy to mistake composure for compliance, to look at someone who absorbs quietly and assume they are absorbing because they agree. I had let them make that mistake for 34 years. I stopped letting them. My father called in February. He was back in Germany. He said that he had spoken to Kelsey privately at length. He said he did not want to characterize what she'd said, only that he wanted me to know he had said what needed to be said, and that he was sorry he hadn't been home to say things sooner. He said that his being gone was not the same as him not seeing, and that he saw clearly, and that he was proud of me. He has never been a man who says that phrase casually. I wrote the time in the margin of whatever I was reading, not because I needed to, because it felt like the right word deserved the same treatment as everything else that mattered. Some things you document because they're painful. Some things you document because they're true, and you don't want to forget you heard them. Kelsey sent a text in March. It said, "I know I was wrong. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know I know." It was the most honest thing she had ever said to me. I read it 3 times. I did not respond for 10 days. When I did, I said, "I hear you. I'm not ready for more than this yet." She did not push. That was new. I noticed it. I filed it accordingly. Nora turned 1 in October. We had a small party. Marcus's family, 2 couples from our neighborhood, my father, who took emergency leave to fly home for 48 hours and showed up at the door with a stuffed elephant and 14 months of guilt he was quietly carrying. He held her for a long time. She grabbed his nose. He laughed. It was the loudest I had heard him laugh in years. My mother was invited. She came and she was careful and quiet, and she held Nora once briefly, and she looked at me over Nora's head with something I still don't have an exact word for. Not quite remorse. Not quite pride. Something in between. Something that knew it had missed a window and was trying to figure out if another one would open. I don't know if it will. I'm not in charge of that timeline. What I'm in charge of is this: the documentation in Nora's pediatric file, which I will never need to use and which I will never delete. The notes entry from December 25th, still in my phone, timestamp intact. The text from Kelsey in March, screenshot and saved, not as ammunition, as a record of growth in case I need to remember that growth is possible. And the welfare note from January, signed by our pediatrician, which says, "Child assessed, appropriate weight and development, parental account of incident on file, no clinical concerns at this time." No clinical concerns. That's all it says. 6 words. It is the most reassuring document I have ever held. My father goes back on deployment in the spring. Before he left for the airport, he sat with Nora in the living room while I made coffee, and I could hear him talking to her in the low, measured voice he uses when he is saying something important to someone he loves. I didn't move closer. Some things are not for documentation. When he came into the kitchen, he said, "She's going to be remarkable." I handed him his coffee. "I know," I said. He nodded. We stood there for a moment. "Your instincts are correct," he said. They were always correct. He wasn't talking about Nora. I knew he wasn't talking about Nora. I thought about every time I had doubted what I saw because someone in that house told me I was being dramatic. I thought about what it cost over the years to calibrate your own perception against someone else's convenience. And I thought about the moment I stopped. 2:47 p.m. December 25th. The moment I opened my notes app and wrote down exactly what had happened, in clear language, without interpretation or apology, and trusted myself enough to call it what it was. I didn't do it to build a case. I did it because I am a nurse and nurses document, and some part of me, The part that had been documenting other people's truths for 9 years, finally understood that my own experience deserved the same precision. That is what changed. Not Kelsey. Not my mother. Not even my father's arrival, though I am grateful for it, genuinely and completely. What changed was me. I stopped being a witness to my own life and started being its recorder. If you've ever been called dramatic for reacting accurately to something real, you already understand what it costs to second-guess yourself for years and what it feels like when you finally stop. The timestamp on my Notes app entry is still December 25th, 2:47 p.m. I don't need to look at it anymore. But I know exactly where it is. Quiet people keep the receipts. If this reminded you that your perception is allowed to be accurate, that calm is not the same as compliant, and that some debts you never agreed to carry are yours to put down, take that with you. Tell someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.